Magic is kind of hard to define, especially since today it isn't really a mainstream part of our culture, at least outside of Lord of the Rings or Dungeons and Dragons. Magic is often pushed way into the realms of fiction, in teen dramas with spellbooks and soppy romance. Looking at you, Vampire Diaries. And whenever you mention the word, you either get met with hordes of adoring teenagers who claim you watch too much TV, or their parents and grandparents thinking you're a Satanist who eats, I don't know, goats or something. Either way, it isn't taken seriously despite its enormous part in human history. Even within the New Age community, it's often assumed that magic is an evil practice and somehow associated with psychic vampirism. In any case, it's safe to say that there's a lot of confusion around what exactly magic is, and if it even exists. And isn't it time we cleared the air? By taking cues from the original mystery cults, today you are going to learn the magic essentials. And you might even pick up some basic energy work for yourself. And so, to begin, let's travel back to magic's ancient past. Since magic and religion often go hand in hand, anthropology can study it in the context of modern-day tribal societies or ancient cultures, taking a more ethnographic or scientific approach to it. Anthropologists will often define magic as the application of beliefs, rituals, or actions practiced within the view that they can subdue or manipulate natural or supernatural beings and forces. And while this is sort of true, it represents an outsider's view. You know, someone who doesn't actually practice the art. While most ancient cultures had a concept of magic, it isn't ever really defined since it was such a core aspect of human culture that it didn't really need explaining. It was just a thing that they did. In more recent history, you have people like Crowley with his Thelema defining magic as the science and art that provokes change in conformity with the will. Meaning that all intentional acts are arguably acts of magic. Taking note from the philosophers like Schopenhauer, Crowley thought that our will had the ability to merge with the flow and energy of the universe and affect the world around us. So by channeling our will together with focused intention, he thought we could change our reality. Because, in short, the thelemic system is founded on the idea that the individual is a microcosmic image of the universe, or of God, depending on your belief. And since we are ourselves like young deities, we too can create and cause changes in the world. Seems pretty cool so far, but let's keep going. If we look at the root of the word magic itself, we find it comes from the Greek magos, which in turn came from the old Persian word magush, which was their word for magi, or priest. But coming back a little further, even magush comes from the Proto-Indo-European verb mag, or meg, which meant to be able, suggesting the root of the word magic is just the act of enabling something to happen. In a fun modern sense, you might think of magic as the ability to create coincidences. You could even say that if spirituality is learning about the soul, magic is the act of applying it, which is in line with the Egyptian concept of Heka, translated as the first work or the great work. To give you a better idea of this whole coincidence thing, the anthropologist Evans Pritchard wrote his groundbreaking work on witchcraft, oracles, and magic among the Azande people of North Central Africa and uses the example of a granary. He tells us that if a person is killed by the collapse of the granary, the Azande will call it witchcraft. This doesn't mean they deny that the poles on which the granary rested were destroyed by termites. And they know very well that many people rest under a granary in summer, so it could be coincidence. However, that the granary collapsed in exactly the moment in which a specific human being, who was the target, sat under it, and not a moment before or after, is believed to be the result of witchcraft. Now, of course, this is a specific case. I would hope you're not gonna go dropping buildings on people, but you get the idea. You're not gonna shoot fireballs out of your hands or call down a storm, but it is possible to create a string of coincidences or synchronicities by doing specific actions that will benefit you somehow. Is that a thing? Absolutely yes. Historically speaking, as far back as the Middle Paleolithic Old Stone Age, we start to get evidence of religious behavior as well as the first burials. Belief in an afterlife and spirits really starts to come into its own during the Upper Paleolithic, around 40 to 45,000 years ago. Cave paintings like Le Chaux and Dordogne in France show that people began to believe in supernatural beings at least as early as 32,000 years ago. The earliest forms of magic were sympathetic, using figurines or effigies to link a ritual to the real stuff. And then there's apotropaic, using amulets to ward off evil or bring good luck. What's kind of interesting though is that there's paintings in Dordogne that shows figures that are half man, half animal doing some kind of dance that has been interpreted as early signs of shamanism or transformation magic, where the shaman will shapeshift into other beasts. In short, a mixture of shamanistic and animistic beliefs are what compromised the world's first religion. Now, our first Western concept of magic and spirituality is rooted in the ancient Judeo-Christian and Greco-Roman systems, as well as being heavily influenced by the Egyptian mystery cults. And while we can't really say for sure what form these early practices took, one of the cornerstones of all the later Renaissance and medieval manuscripts were the Greco-Egyptian magical papyri. These ancient scrolls were written in different places, but mostly come from Hellenic Egypt in around 100 BC to 400 AD. They include magical recipes involving animals and substances, along with instructions for ritual preparations, hymns, lists of spells, and different formulas that paved the way for all the later experiments of the medieval period. PGM4 also contains one of the only existing cases of a mystery initiation that was written down. And while it's often thought that magic died out with the rise and spread of Christianity, actually, early Christians were pretty chill about it. In the Gospel of Matthew, we have the classic Jesus story where he was visited by 3 wise men, you know the one, who were regarded as magi, Zoroastrian priests with a knowledge of astrology and alchemy, bringing Jesus classical alchemical ingredients. In fact, the original gospel never actually mentioned there being only 3. It only said that they brought 3 gifts. But the Syriac churches say there were 12 or more. In the book of Acts, however, we see the story of Simon Magus, who tried to buy the miraculous powers of the disciples, an act that the medieval church associated with demons, which led to the belief that magic was somehow competing against the true miracles of God and the church, which, unfortunately, is what led to the church publicly associating magic with paganism and, the devil. But the church also then continued to practice apotropaic magic and blessings themselves. So, lessons for thee and not for me, perhaps? During Europe's conversion to Christianity, medicinal remedies found in monks' manuscripts tended to combine Christian formulas and rites with Germanic folk rituals to empower natural ingredients that would cure ailments supposedly caused by poisons, elf attacks, dope, demonic possession, or other invisible forces. And we all know how the early church appropriated pagan holidays, nudge nudge. And seriously, elf attacks are serious business. You don't want to mess with an elf. During the Middle Ages, the church divided the concept of magic into natural, which focused on using nature and God to heal and perform miracles, and demonic, which focused around demonology and divination, and, pretty much anything not coming from God. Which is where we started to get this belief in, quote-unquote, selling your soul, and magic became much more demonized. But like telling a kid not to do something, this basically led to the golden age of magic. Grimoires, books of spells, became very popular and widespread, and it's around this time that we get some of the most famous magical texts. It's actually really funny. Despite the church outlawing any kind of book that contained divination, necromancy, and demonology, there's a lot of evidence that the medieval clergy were the main practitioners of magic, and thus the owners, transcribers, and circulators of grimoires. With over 7 grimoires to be exact, being written by popes alone. Like, what exactly? Later during the Renaissance, there was renewed interest in ancient Middle Eastern practices, Neoplatonic mysticism, and Arabic texts on alchemy and astrology. Marsilio Ficino studied astral magic and the power of music to channel cosmic influences. Pico Mirandola sought hidden knowledge in Jewish Kabbalah. while Giordano Bruno explored the mystical Hermetica, which helped to lay the groundwork for much of modern science and the age of discovery. If you don't know any of these names, that's okay. All you gotta know is that they were serious players during the Renaissance and did some pretty big stuff for Western civilization. Fast forwarding to our modern era, magic is often divided into different kinds of groups. Now, you can make the argument that magic is simply energy work, and there's really only one kind that's just expressed in different ways, right? But people tend to play around with different arts, like divination, astrology, there's also geomancy, you got alchemy, meditation, evocation, and necromancy too. Just to name a few, of course. If you've ever looked into modern magic at all, you've probably come across the whole right versus left-hand path dichotomy. If you ask followers of neo-pagan religions or New Age circles, they'll often tell you that it equates basically with white and black magic, or that some magic is good and others are bad, a belief carried over from the early church. But here's the thing though, the whole thing is kind of pointless. If magic is just the control and direction of energy, it isn't really good or bad. Magic has no color. There's only energy and yourself. While working through magic, you might find that elements of the energy are alive in their own way, but the techniques are simply a tool to manifest. Think of magic like a hammer. It can be used to hit someone, sure, but can also be used to build a house. That doesn't make the hammer good or bad, it's what you do with it that counts. The whole concept of right-hand path versus left-hand path originates actually in Indian Tantra. But most modern-day occult groups who abide by one or the other do so out of wanting to control their members and say what kinds of magic they can or cannot use. In fact, many left-hand magicians see the notion of karma as self-imposed, or a tool used by dogmatic spiritual groups to control the actions of their members. Some modern occultists, like Peter Carroll, have stressed that both paths can actually be followed at once, as they essentially have similar goals: self-empowerment and creating change. But on a more practical level, the right-hand path focuses on worshiping deities, with the eventual end goal of becoming one with them, or experiencing transcendence, working to completely dissolve back into source. The left-hand path, though, tends to embrace the dark as well as the light in order to invoke the alchemical formula solve et coagula, dissolve and precipitate, confronting the negative in order to transmute it into desirable qualities. Rather than merging with the source and dissolving the ego, left-hand practitioners generally aim to reunite with the divine and take an extra step to separate themselves again, but retain that creation ability to become their own god and create their own reality. Think of it as enlightenment, but retaining the ego. Now, of course, this is a huge oversimplification of the craft, but hopefully you get the general idea. It's important to note that the Sanskrit Vamakara, from which the modern left-hand system comes via Madame Blavatsky, was simply seen as another path to enlightenment that was against the orthodox Vedic scripture because it incorporated Hindu taboos such as ritual sex, drinking alcohol, and eating meat, but wasn't considered bad or evil, just a different path. So if we were to bring all of this together, magic is based heavily on your own morality. The same energy that's used to protect someone can also be used to curse them. But it's all on you and how you use it. While we can ask that you use better judgment and always come from a place of compassion, it's also important to develop your own resolve and morality, since your craft can be empowered by belief in ideology. While the left-hand path is often considered evil, it's just a path of no gods or authorities except yourself, which is incredibly empowering and meaningful, as opposed to putting yourself at the mercy of a deity or the universe. But at the same time, maybe there's something to be said for dissolving the ego and freeing yourself from suffering. Don't forget, this is just the beginning. Toodly bye!